The desert wasn't supposed to end this way. Isabel Reyes didn't fall to her knees so much as fold like a tent collapsed by wind. Her legs gave out, her breath caught in her throat, and the world tilted sideways as Antelope Valley rose in shimmering heat before her. The main street was only a blur of sun-faded buildings and plank sidewalks, stitched together by dust and the reek of livestock. The sky, too wide, seemed to press down harder than the saddle had across her back. Her lips were cracked, her mouth bone dry. Her boots, once sturdy leather from her father's savings, had split at the toes. She collapsed against the bench outside the general store, its wood splintered with age. 3 days. 3 days without food that wasn't stolen scraps, without water except what she'd begged or taken from cattle troughs, but the emptiness inside her chest that had lasted far longer. Children played in the distance, shouting in Navajo and Spanish, their laughter skipping through the air like birds. A man with a drooping mustache tipped his hat as he passed, but didn't stop. A woman selling soapstone beads glanced at her, blinked, and turned away. Isabel didn't blame them. She hadn't come here to be seen. She'd come here because there was nowhere left to go. The sun flickered behind her eyelids. Her fingers twitched over the pouch tied to her waist, the only thing she hadn't lost. Inside was a deed, old, creased. Written in her uncle's hand, a promise, or a lie. She didn't know which anymore. But she'd ridden from Santa Fe with nothing except that paper and a ring. Now only the paper remained. A shadow moved beside her. She didn't look up. "I could use a drink," came a low, quiet voice. The kind of voice made for the shade-deep, quiet, and slightly rough around the edges. Not threatening. Just still. She cracked one eye open. A man stood over her, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a dust-covered Stetson pulled low. His skin was sun-browned, and his jaw was marked by the faint shadow of stubble. One arm rested lazily at his side. The other held a tin cup. "I don't drink," Isabel croaked, her throat raw. "Water's a drink, too," he said, kneeling down and offering it. She hesitated, then took it. Her hands trembled as she brought it to her lips. The water was warm but clean. She drank it all. Every drop. When she finally looked up, he was still watching her, not like a man watching a woman, but like a tracker watching a wounded creature that might bolt or bite. "Name's Hawk," he said. "Joaquin Ten Bears. Folks call me Hawk. I am the law here." "Sort of." She tried to sit straighter. "Isabel Reyes." He nodded, as if the name already meant something. "You from Santa Fe?" She didn't answer right away. "I'm passing through," she said instead. "Heading to a place called Pedra Curvo Ridge. There's land there that used to belong to my uncle." Hawk's expression didn't change, but his gaze shifted slightly, like someone mentally placing pins on a map. "Pedra Curvos, 30 miles northeast, but you should know most folks don't pass through there." The silver dried up. "Town, too." She exhaled, sharp and shaky. Of course it had. He sat beside her, leaving a respectful distance. "What brings you there alone?" Her mouth twitched. "A man I trusted said he'd help me claim the land." He helped himself instead. "Name?" Hawk asked. "Malcolm Vane." The name lingered in the air like a bullet that hadn't landed yet. Hawk didn't flinch, but the muscles in his jaw moved once, barely. Isabel looked away. "He took everything," she said. "My house. My money. I was a schoolteacher. That's all I ever was. I didn't even know I had an uncle out here until Vane showed up with letters and stories and smiles I was foolish enough to believe. And now," she gestured to herself, dusty skirt, broken boots, the sweat crusting her hairline. "He took my hope." For a long moment, Hawk said nothing. The sound of a crow cawing somewhere above them punctuated the silence. Then, softly, as if he wasn't used to saying such things aloud, "Then I'll lend you mine, till yours grows back." Isabel blinked, stunned. She searched his face for any trace of pity, mockery, or strategy. She found none. Just tired blue eyes, steady as granite. He stood and adjusted his hat. "Widow Hess's boarding house has clean rooms and fair prices. You can rest. Figure out your next step. I don't have money. You have a name, a deed, and a reason. That's enough for now. He offered his hand, then let it fall when she didn't take it. No pressure. Isabel forced herself to her feet. Her legs shook. I'll pay you back. Hawk tilted his head. Folks in these parts tend to settle debts in their own way. Don't worry about mine. As they walked toward the edge of town, Isabel felt every eye on her. Some curious, some cold. She kept walking anyway. The worst had already happened. Probably. If that bastard forged everything, what if the land isn't even real? The boarding house sat at the edge of town, where the packed dirt street gave way to yellowed brush and dry sage. It was a squat, weather-worn structure with whitewashed siding and shuttered windows. A narrow porch lined with 3 empty rocking chairs that creaked in the breeze. Isabel paused at the bottom step. Something about the stillness made her stomach tighten. The last time she'd stepped over a threshold she didn't own, she'd walked into a trap of kindness turned to theft. But Hawk had said this woman was decent. Then again, she'd thought Malcolm Vane was decent too. Hawk moved past her and knocked twice on the door. It opened a moment later with a sharp click, revealing a stout, gray-haired woman in an apron. Flour on her forearms and eyes sharp as broken glass. Joaquin, she said, not quite smiling. Trouble. No, Greta, he said. A guest. Needs a room for a while? Widow Greta Hess looked Isabel over. It's not with cruelty, but with the clinical appraisal of a woman who'd scrubbed blood from floors and buried to husbands without ceremony. You're a mess, she said matter-of-factly. Isabel didn't flinch. Yes, Malem. Well, I got a back room. Faces east. Gets good light. Bath is extra, but let's not pretend you don't need one. I can pay, Isabel said, reaching into the pouch on her belt. Her fingers closed around the last thing she owned, her mother's gold wedding ring. She held it out, palm open. The gold was dulled but still warm from her skin. Greta took the ring gently, almost reverently, and held it up to the light. This'll more than cover a week. Room, meals, bath. I'll hold it in trust. You leave early? I return the difference in coin. Fair, Isabel said, throat thick. Greta nodded and stepped aside. I'll send up hot water. And something to wear while your things are washed. Isabel stepped inside. The scent of old wood and warm bread hit her like a memory she didn't recognize. Hawk remained on the porch, quiet. You're not coming in? She asked. I've seen the place, he said, eyes kind but unreadable. You need rest. I'll check on you tomorrow. If you're still set on heading to Pedro Curvo, I'll ride with you. Isabel nodded slowly. Thank you. Hawk, don't thank me yet. She watched him go, tall and quiet and shadowless in the late-day sun. And for a moment, she felt something she hadn't felt in months. Safe, the room was simple but clean. A narrow bed with a patchwork quilt, a washstand beside the window, and a folding screen with a copper tub behind it. 2 young boys hauled in steaming buckets of water, their eyes wide as they glanced at Isabel's dirt-covered face and ragged clothes. When she was finally alone, she peeled off the layers that still clung to her like shame and slid into the bath. The water stung her cracked skin. It smelled faintly of lavender and iron. She didn't cry right away. Not until the second bucket of water cooled and the dirt on her arms gave way to pale scars and bruises. She didn't remember getting. Not until she thought of her mother's ring resting in a stranger's apron pocket. Not until she thought of Malcolm's voice, smooth and sweet, promising she'd be safe. Liar Isabel buried her face in her hands and let the sobs come. She cried for Santa Fe, for the classroom she'd left behind. For the girls who'd written her goodbye letters she never answered. She cried for her father, long dead in some nameless field during the war. For her mother, who'd whispered prayers in Spanish even as her lungs gave out. She cried for the version of herself who believed that decency was its own kind of armor. And when the tears were gone, all that remained was bone and resolve. She dressed in the clean cotton gown Widow Hess had laid out, ate the slice of bread and wedge of cheese that had appeared beside her bed, and lay down without turning down the quilt. The room felt too still, too solid, as if it might vanish if she blinked too hard. But the mattress held her. The air was quiet, and no one had asked her for anything. For now, that was enough. If that bastard forged everything, what if the land isn't even real? The knock came just after sunrise. Isabel startled awake, heart thudding in her chest, the quilt twisted around her legs like a rope. For a moment she didn't remember where she was. The room was still, except for the quiet creak of wood and the soft whistle of wind through a crack in the window pane. Her hand went to the pouch by her side, empty now. Her mother's ring was gone. No, not gone. Traded. The knock came again firm, but not impatient. She slipped on the shawl hanging over the bedpost, crossed the floor barefoot, and opened the door. Hawk stood there, clean-shaven this time, a different hat pulled low over his brow. He held 2 mugs of something steaming, and his eyes flicked to hers with quiet focus. "Brought coffee," he said simply. "Figured you might need something strong this morning." She stepped aside without thinking, and he handed her a mug that smelled dark and bitter and real. They didn't speak right away. She sipped slowly, wincing at the heat, and walked to the window. Outside, the town was already stirring. A wagon rattled by, chickens clucked behind a fence, and a child laughed like he hadn't been told yet what the world could take from you. "Sleep?" Hawk asked. "Some," she said, after a beat, "the kind that's too deep to be restful." He nodded. "Body shuts down when it needs to." She glanced at him over the rim of the cup. "That what they taught you, Marshal?" "I'm not much of one. Temporary badge. Real Marshal left 2 years ago. Never looked back." He leaned against the doorframe. "Town didn't have much law since then, so they asked me to carry the tin until someone better shows up." "You don't think you're good enough?" "I think I'm not interested in convincing anyone." His tone was mild, almost bored, but his eyes didn't flinch. Isabel found herself staring again. Not because of the sharpness in him, or the strength, those were obvious. It was the stillness, like he'd been carved out of the land itself. "Why did you help me?" she asked quietly. Hawk considered the question longer than she expected. "Because you looked like someone who'd already made peace with being ignored," he said. "And I don't like watching people disappear while they're still breathing." Her throat tightened around the steam of the coffee. Downstairs, she heard the thump of boots and the scrape of chairs against the floor. Greta was up. That meant breakfast would be soon. And with it, questions she wasn't sure she could answer. "I still want to see the land," she said. "My uncle's land. Pedra Curvo Ridge." "You sure?" Hawk asked. "The claim's probably overgrown. Could be someone squatting there now." "I need to see it," she said, "even if it's empty." He gave a small nod. "We'll ride out tomorrow, first light. It'll take us most of the day." "What about today?" "You rest." "And you talk to Greta why?" "Because," he said, tilting his head slightly, "she's not just a landlady. She's the kind of woman who knows everything before the preacher hears it. You might find her sharper than she looks." She arched a brow. "She looks pretty sharp already." He smiled then, barely, but it cracked the edge of his face like sunlight breaking through a canyon wall. He set his mug on the washstand, tipped his hat, and left. Greta didn't ask questions until Isabel was on her second biscuit. "You from Santa Fe?" the widow said, not looking up as she kneaded dough on the kitchen table. "I was." "What made you leave?" Isabel paused. The butter on the biscuit tasted like real cream and salt, something solid and true. It didn't feel right to lie with that in her mouth. "A man lied to me," she said finally. "Said I had a family inheritance, that he could help me claim it. Took everything I had. I came here because it's the only thing left." Greta nodded, still working the dough. "What's his name?" "Malcolm Vane." That made Greta stop. She looked up, hands flour-dusted and still. "You sure?" "I'm sure." Greta cursed under her breath in German, wiped her hands on her apron, and walked to a tall cabinet. From inside, she pulled out a tin box. She opened it and pulled free a small folded poster. She slapped it down on the table. Isabel leaned in. It was a wanted notice. The sketch was rough, but the eyes were right. Smooth lines, soft jaw, the kind of face that looked kind until it smiled too wide. Malcolm, V.A.N.E., fraud, forgery, impersonation. Last seen in the Arizona Territory, bound by reward. He came through here a few months back, Greta said. Told me he was an investor looking for mineral rights. Had a preacher's manners, but the kind of smile I don't trust. I didn't sell him a damn thing. Isabel sat back, heart hammering. He said, my uncle left me land. Showed me letters. Said he was a lawyer for the probate office. Greta snorted. He couldn't spell probate if you carved it into his damn boots. Then the letters were fake, Isabel whispered. Maybe. Or maybe the land's real and he just figured you'd never make it out here to check. Isabel stared at the poster, her pulse thudding in her ears. I have to know. If the deed's fake, then I've lost everything. But if it's real? Greta folded the poster, slipped it back into the tin. Then you've got something to fight for. Isabel did need another bite. That night she stared at the deed under the flickering lamplight. The ink was faded, but the signature was clear. Thomas Reyes. Her mother's brother, a man she'd never met, never even knew existed. The land had coordinates, descriptions, edges and fences. It felt real. It looked real. But if Malcolm Vane had forged the rest... She set the paper down carefully and sat back in the chair. The silence pressed in around her. She thought about Hawk's voice, calm as a riverbed. You've got a name, a deed, and a reason. That's enough. But was it? She stood up, crossed the room, and opened the window. The desert night was cooler now, sharp with sage and distant horses. Somewhere far off, an owl called out. She closed her eyes. If that bastard forged everything, what if the land isn't even real? And if it was real, what would she do with it? What would it take to make it hers? If there's silver, Malcolm Vane is coming back. The sound of horse hooves on packed dirt echoed like distant thunder through Isabel's window. Morning had barely lifted the edges of the night sky. But Hawk was already there, leaning against the hitching post outside the boarding house. Reins looped loosely in one hand, 2 horses waiting. Isabel had anti-slept. She'd spent most of the night pacing her room, the deed clutched in one hand. That damn poster of Malcolm Vane burned into the back of her eyelids. Even with Greta's rough honesty and Hawk's calm presence, the fear gnawed at her. Because if the paper she carried was a lie, then this wasn't a journey toward something. It was a funeral march for the last piece of her life that might still be real. She stepped out onto the porch, her borrowed riding boots clumsy but serviceable. She'd braided her hair to keep it off her neck, tucked her blouse into a canvas skirt. Practical. Not the teacher in Santa Fe. Not the woman who'd fallen for a con man's smile. Someone else. Maybe someone stronger. Hawk looked her over once, nodded. You ride? Not well, she admitted. I'll set the pace slow. She mounted with more effort than grace, hands gripping the horn of the saddle tight enough to turn her knuckles white. Hawk swung into his own seat in one fluid motion and nudged his horse forward. Isabel followed, the town shrinking behind them. As the morning opened up, so did the land. Scrub pines dotted low hills, and red rock jutted from the earth like old bones. The air smelled of dust and juniper. Lizards darted across the trail, and buzzards circled high above, patient and silent. They rode in silence for miles. Hawk didn't offer conversation, and Isabel didn't ask for it. She was still figuring out how to be in her own skin again. At mid-morning, they stopped by a stream to water the horses. Isabel climbed down stiffly and dipped her hands in the cold current. My uncle's name was Thomas, she said finally. Thomas Reyes. I didn't know him. He left New Mexico before I was born. My mother never spoke of him. Hawk crouched nearby, refilling his canteen. He homesteaded that land 30 years back, he said. Built a place himself. Small cabin. Apple trees, I heard. Stayed out of town mostly. You knew him? Hawk shook his head. Only heard about him. Old-timers said he was quiet, hard-working. Some thought he was running from something. Isabel's brow furrowed. Like what? Don Tino. Don't ask questions about ghosts unless you want to share your house with them. She managed a small smile at that. They rode again, and with each hour the land grew lonelier and touched and unbothered. Coyotes cried in the distance. By afternoon, they reached a plateau with a view of the valley below. Hawk raised a hand and Isabel slowed beside him. "There," he said, pointing. She followed his gaze. Her breath caught. Nestled between two ridgelines was a patch of land that looked like it had been forgotten by time. Faded fence posts still stood in some places. A collapsed barn lay tilted to one side, but there was a cabin, small and squared off, half hidden beneath a line of wind-warped apple trees. Gnarled but alive. Isabel dismounted before Hawk could stop her. She walked toward the trees as if drawn by something deeper than memory. Bark flaked beneath her fingertips. The earth was dry, but not dead. She reached the cabin's door. It hung slightly open. Inside, dust covered everything. Shelves, a table, an iron stove. A narrow cot stood in the corner, its blanket moth-eaten and sun-bleached. On the table was a rusted tin cup and a Bible with its spine cracked wide, and beneath it, a leather-bound journal. Her breath stilled. She picked it up, flipped to the first page. The handwriting was careful, strong. "To Isabel, should you ever find this place." She stared at the words until they blurred. The journal trembled in her hands. She sat down hard on the nearest chair and turned the page. Outside, Hawk stood guard beneath the trees, arms crossed. He didn't enter the cabin. He knew what it meant, finding proof. Not just of the land, but of family. Of a past that might have loved her even when she hadn't known it. When Isabel finally stepped out, her face was pale, her fingers still wrapped around the journal. "He meant for me to come here," she said. Hawk nodded once. "Looks that way." She looked out over the land, eyes scanning what had once been fences, orchards, home. "I could fix it up. Clear the weeds. Maybe rebuild the barn." "You could," Hawk said. "But if Vane thinks there's still silver in the ridge, he'll come back." Her head turned sharply. "What?" He nodded toward the hills. "I checked the land records last year. One of the last filings under your uncle's name included a claimed small vein, not worth much. But with new methods, someone might think otherwise. Vane probably saw it when he was nosing around Santa Fe. That's likely why he forged the papers." Isabel stared at the valley, the beauty of it warped now by something colder. "He wanted this," she whispered. "All of it." Hawk's voice was low, "and he'll want it again." They stood in silence for a long moment. Then Isabel drew a breath that went deeper than the ones before. When she spoke again, her voice was steady. "Then let him try." Hawk gave her a long look. Not quite approval, but something close. "You staying tonight?" She nodded. "This is mine. Whether it's broken or not." He moved toward the horses. "I'll ride back. Let Greta know you'll be gone a few days. I'll send supplies with Tomas in the morning." Tomas. "Friend of your uncle's. Comanche. Watched the land while he was sick. You'll like him." She hesitated. "You trust him?" "With my life." That seemed enough. Hawk mounted, looked back at her once. "You find anything else in that journal? Bring it into town when you're ready." Isabel stood at the door of the cabin as he rode away. The wind moved through the trees, carrying the scent of apples not yet born. She opened the journal again. "You're stronger than your mother was. And she was stronger than most men I've known. If you're reading this, Nina, it means you made it. That alone tells me everything I need to know." Tears welled again, but this time they came without shame. She closed the book, walked back inside, and began to sweep the dust from the floor. "Welcome home, Isabel Reyes," the wind seemed to whisper. The road back to Silver Spur wasn't a road at all, just a thin stretch of hoof-worn trail winding through mesas and dry creeks. Scrub grass pushing up between scattered stones. Isabel rode behind Hawk this time, Tomas White Elk beside her on a quiet black mare. The silence between them was comfortable, broken only by the occasional chirr of cicadas or the clatter of loose rocks beneath their horses' hooves. Tomas was older than she expected, in his mid-60s, maybe with braided silver-streaked hair and eyes that saw farther than the horizon. He'd brought supplies as promised a canvas bag of dried meat, cornmeal, a whetstone, and a few tools, and had stayed the night at the ridge to help patch the roof. He hadn't asked for her story, but she could feel him watching her when she moved, the way a man watched weather in the distance, quietly, steadily, and with respect. "You sit your saddle better than yesterday," Hawk said without turning. Isabel allowed herself a smirk. "I stopped trying to fight it." "Good lesson. Applies to more than horses." She caught Tomas' glance at Hawk and then at her, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. "You always speak in riddles?" Isabel asked. "Only when I like someone," Hawk said, and kept riding. They crested a hill around noon, the sun painting long lines across the red earth. Below, in the shallow basin of an old creek bed, stood a small, weather-worn cabin framed by cottonwoods. Smoke rose from its chimney, lazy and slow. "Naomi lives there," Hawk said. "She can patch you up, read signs in the land, and make tea that'll fix whatever ails you except maybe your pride." "Naomi?" Isabel asked, trying to read his tone. "Apache healer," Thomas said. "Lived out here long before the railroad came. She's complicated." That word again. Complicated. Everyone around here was either broken or complicated. Usually both. The cabin looked hand-built, logs notched by hand, the porch shaded by a curtain of hanging herbs and dried flowers. As they dismounted, the front door opened. Naomi stepped out barefoot, wearing a linen shift tied at the waist, silver bangles on one wrist, and a knife strapped to the other. Her face was sharp, angular, beautiful in a way that didn't care what anyone thought. Her gaze landed on Hawk first. "You bring ghosts with you now?" she asked, arms folded. Hawk inclined his head. "Thought you might want to meet this one." Naomi looked at Isabel next. Her eyes didn't soften. "You're the girl from the ridge. Isabel Reyes." Naomi stared another second, then nodded once and turned to Tomas. "I made stew. You're staying for lunch." Inside, the cabin was cool and filled with shadows. The smell of cedar, dried sage, and something earthy filled the air. A kettle bubbled on the stove. Isabel took a seat beside the small window while Naomi stirred the pot. "You were close with my uncle?" Isabel asked after a moment. Naomi didn't look up. "Not close. But he respected boundaries. Brought me seeds every spring. Paid me in honey for remedies. He trusted you." Naomi finally met her eyes. "He didn't trust easily. You favor your mother more than him. You knew her?" "I knew of her. She left long before your uncle settled down." Isabel felt her shoulders tighten. Every answer raised more questions. She wasn't sure what she expected, some warm welcome, some tearful recognition. But Naomi was as blunt as the land itself. Hawk leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "She's not here to find family," he said. "She's here to find her footing." Naomi snorted. "She won't find it chasing old bones." Isabel set her jaw. "I am not chasing anything. This land is mine. That makes it worth protecting." Naomi's spoon paused mid-stir. "So you plan to stay?" "I do." Naomi turned, and for the first time, her gaze softened. "Just slightly. Then I'll give you something to help. You'll need it." She poured the stew into bowls, set them on the table without fanfare. They ate in silence, the only sound the occasional creak of wood and the gentle breeze lifting the curtain by the window. After the meal, Isabel stepped outside, needing air. The land stretched out in all directions, wild, unpaved, unmoved by everything she'd ever known. It was beautiful and terrifying. Hawk joined her, arms folded, gaze distant. "You okay?" he asked. "I don't know. That's honest." They stood side by side, not touching, not speaking for a while. "You and Naomi," Isabel started. "Old story," Hawk said. "Didn't he end badly?" "Just ended. She still watches you like it didn't." Hawk let out a low breath that might have been a laugh. "She watches everyone like that." Isabel looked out at the horizon where the red earth met the blue sky in a seamless blur. "What happens now?" she asked. "You rest. Tomorrow, We ride to Silver Spur. I want to check the deed with the recorder's office. And if it's real, then the land is yours. And if it's not, Hawk looked at her then, steady and clear. Then we find another way to make it yours. She didn't know what to say to that. They stayed the night at Naomi's, sleeping on bedrolls beneath the stars. Hawk took the first watch, sitting by the fire with a rifle across his lap. Tomas snored softly beside the fire. Isabel lay awake for a long time, watching the sky deepen from cobalt to black, pierced by stars so bright they looked close enough to touch. She thought of the journal back at the cabin, the way her uncle had written to her as if he knew she'd come. She thought of Hawk's calm voice, Naomi's sharpness, Tomas's quiet strength. She wasn't alone, but she also wasn't safe. Not yet. She rolled over, closed her eyes, and whispered a silent promise. She wouldn't run again. The next morning, just before they saddled up, Naomi pressed a leather pouch into Isabel's hands. "Dried yarrow, juniper, bearberry," she said. "Boil it when your chest feels heavy. And keep this with you." She handed over a small, carved, stone-smooth black, warm from Naomi's palm. "For protection?" Isabel asked. "For memory," Naomi replied. "So you don't forget what matters when it gets hard." Isabel swallowed, nodded. "Thank you." Naomi didn't smile, but her eyes weren't as sharp anymore. As they rode out, the sun rising behind them, Isabel looked back once at the cabin. The herbs on the porch swayed in the breeze like prayers. Ahead lay Silver Spur, a town of ledgers and names on paper. "You're not the only one searching for that land, Isabel." Silver Spur looked smaller than Isabel expected. Maybe it was the way the mesas loomed behind it, making the building seem temporary, like they'd been dropped there and forgotten. Or maybe it was the fact that nothing seemed real anymore, unless it hurt. The three of them rode into town just past noon, the heat stretching the air like glass. Tomas peeled off to the livery while Hawk helped Isabel dismount. Quiet and efficient, saying nothing about the way her knees shook when her boots hit the ground. "You all right?" he asked. "I'm fine," she said, brushing dust off her skirt. He gave her a look that said he didn't believe her but wasn't going to press it. She appreciated that. The land office sat at the edge of the main street, squat adobe structure with a slanted tin roof and a sign that read Territorial Records in chipped black paint. A bell jingled as they stepped inside, the dry scent of old paper and dried ink hitting her like a memory. An older man sat behind the counter, spectacles perched on his nose, sleeves rolled up past his elbows. His nameplate read Harlan Teague. "Well, Hawk," the man said, not looking up. "Ain't seen you in a spell?" "Been busy," Hawk replied. "Need you to verify something?" That got Teague's attention. His eyes flicked to Isabel, then back to Hawk. "She's with you?" "She's the one with the question." Teague leaned back and folded his hands over his belly. "Well then, let us have it." Isabel stepped forward and unrolled the deed. It was creased, soft at the folds, but the ink was still legible. Teague took it, pulled a magnifying glass from his vest pocket, and studied the writing in silence. The room felt too still. The ticking of the wall clock sounded loud enough to shake the floor. After several minutes, he leaned back and exhaled through his nose. "Well, I'll be damned." Isabel's heart skipped. "What?" "It's real," Teague said. "Filed proper. Signed and sealed. Original entry logged in 1873 under Thomas Reyes. Last known addenduma, mineral claim dated 5 years ago." "Silver?" Hawk asked. Teague nodded. "Small vein. Low yield back then. Might be worth more now with new machines. But the land was never refiled after Thomas died. Ownership defaults to next of kin. That DBU." Isabel blinked. "So it's mine?" "As long as you can prove you're related." She reached into her pouch and handed over a folded birth certificate. "My mother was Alina Reyes, Thomas's sister." Teague took one look and nodded. "That LL do." The room seemed to tilt slightly beneath her. She backed up, needing air, needing space. She stepped out onto the porch and grabbed the railing, breathing hard. It was real. The land. The claim. The cabin. Hawk came out a moment later, silent as always. "Well?" he asked. "It's mine," she said. "All of it." He nodded once. "Good." But his face was too still, too careful. "What is it?" she asked. He looked out at the street, where a group of riders had just arrived. Dust trailed behind them like smoke. "Recognize him?" he asked. She followed his gaze, and her stomach dropped. The man in front dismounted slowly, brushing off his jacket like someone born to find things. He wore a black hat, tilted low over a too familiar smile. Malcolm Vane. He looked the same, polished, calm, almost charming, like someone selling snake oil with a hymn in his voice. But the moment his eyes landed on her, his whole face shifted. Just for a second, surprise, and then calculation. Isabel took a step back. Hawk shifted slightly, one hand lowering toward the revolver at his side but not drawing. Not yet. Malcolm tipped his hat and sauntered toward them. "Well, I'll be," he said. "Miss Reyes. I must say, this is a reunion I didn't expect." "You stole everything from me," she said, voice shaking. "You said my uncle's land was worthless." He smiled, slow and condescending. "And yet here you are, holding the deed. Must be fate." She took a step forward. "You lied to me? I gave you a story," he said. "You chose to believe it." Hawk's voice cut in, sharp and cold. "That story's over. You've got no claim here." Malcolm's eyes flicked to him. "Ah, the lawman." His smile widened. "Well then, we all understand each other. I'm just here to have a look around. Appreciate the countryside." "Nothing illegal about that, is there?" Hawk didn't answer. Neither did Isabel. Malcolm tipped his hat again and walked past them into the land office. One of his men stayed behind, watching them with eyes like burned glass. Isabel turned to Hawk. "He knows. He knew before you did." "Then what's he doing here?" Hawk's jaw clenched. "Checking the papers. Figuring out how to take it from you, legally or otherwise." Isabel's hands trembled at her sides. "Can he?" "Not easily. But men like him don't need easy. They just need a crack in the wall." She turned back to the street, where Malcolm leaned against the hitching post now, chatting with one of his riders like they were on a picnic. "He won't stop," she said. "Even with the deed." "No," Hawk said. He won tea. They stood in silence, the sun climbing higher, baking the dirt into hard clay. Isabel felt something in her chest shifts, something heavy and old. Not fear this time. Resolve. "I'm not leaving," she said. "I didn't think you would." They turned back toward the horses. "Where to now?" she asked. "Back to the ridge," Hawk said. "You need to prepare." "For what?" He looked at her, eyes unreadable. "For what happens when the law isn't enough? If there's silver, Malcolm Vane is coming back." They made it back to the ridge by nightfall. The sky was bruised purple, sun already dipping behind the western peaks as Isabel dismounted, boots hitting the earth with more certainty than the last time she'd stood there. Her hands were raw from gripping the reins, her shoulders aching from the ride, but she didn't complain. The cabin waited like it remembered her. Tomas had beaten them back by half a day, judging by the chopped wood neatly stacked near the front porch and the kettle that still steamed faintly over the outdoor fire pit. He sat cross-legged by the flames, sharpening a long knife with methodical care. "You brought company," he said without looking up. "Malcolm Vane showed up in town," Hawk said. "Saw Isabel. Knew the land's hers." Tomas's hands didn't stop moving. "Then he'll try to take it. One way or another." "He's not alone," Isabel added. "He's got men." "At least 4? "For I counted," Hawk said. "More could be coming." Tomas finally looked up, eyes calm. "You ready for that?" Isabel didn't answer right away. She turned toward the valley. The apple trees whispered in the wind, their branches creaking like old memories. The fence line was still broken in places, but the land was hers. She'd tasted what it meant to claim something and feel it press back not with violence, but with a kind of belonging she didn't expect. She felt it now beneath the soil and in the silence of the place. A pull, a responsibility. Yes, she said. They unpacked in silence. Hawk checked the supplies. Tomas reinforced the cabin windows. And Isabel swept the floor again, not because it needed it, but because her hands needed something to do. The journal sat on the table, open to a page she hadn't reached before. The land doesn't belong to you, Mia. You belong to it. That S, the secret. That's the weight and the gift. She ran her fingers over the ink. The next morning, they began preparing for war. It wasn't the kind of war with flags or uniforms. It was quieter, more practical. Tomas dug out an old rifle and spent the afternoon cleaning it with careful hands. Hawk walked the perimeter of the ridge, marking where someone could ride in unnoticed. Isabel spent hours with rope and wood, reinforcing what she could, mending fence lines, shoring up the door with planks from the broken barn. They talked little. But it wasn't silence born of fear. It was purpose, focus. At dusk, Naomi arrived. She rode up without fanfare, dismounted, and tossed a cloth-wrapped bundle at Isabel's feet. Ammo, dried meat, salve. Isabel crouched to unwrap it. Why are you helping? Naomi gave her a look sharp enough to cut stone. Because this land was meant for someone who'd bleed for it. And because Hawk asked, that last part hung in the air a little longer than Isabel liked. Naomi stepped inside without waiting for permission. Tomas chuckled softly. She always that friendly? Isabel asked. No, he said. That was her version of warm. By firelight, they made a plan. If Vane came, he'd try to scare her off first. He'd bring forged papers, threats, maybe a lawyer from the next county. But if that failed, he'd turn to other means. Bribes. Men with guns. You've got the law on your side for now, Hawk said. But if Vane finds a crooked judge or some loophole, he won't stop, Isabel finished. No, Hawk said. He won tea. Naomi passed her a clay jar. Smear this across the doorframe. Sage and ash. It won't stop bullets, but it'll make you remember what matters when fear starts lying to you. Isabel took it. That night, she walked the land alone. The stars overhead felt like they were watching. She stopped by the old apple tree near the ridge's edge. Its bark was rough, but beneath her touch it felt alive, still breathing, still bearing witness. She closed her eyes and leaned her forehead against it. I don't know what I'm doing, she whispered, but the wind didn't answer with judgment. Only with a hush, like it understood. When she opened her eyes, Hawk was there. Not close, but near enough. I can't stop thinking about what Teague said, she said. That it's legally yours? No. That the silver's worth something now? That Vane knows that. Hawk walked to her side. You don't have to mine it. You don't owe the world that? I know. But maybe I owe me that. He looked at her for a long time. This land isn't just a valley anymore. It's your name now. She nodded. The truth of it landed in her chest like an anchor. Heavy, but grounding. This is the valley of my name, she said softly. Then we hold it, Hawk replied. Together. She didn't say thank you. She didn't need to. He knew. 2 nights later, the first shot rang out just before dawn. It cracked through the quiet like lightning. Tomas rolled from his bedroll in one motion, rifle in hand. Hawk was already at the window, eyes scanning the tree line. Single warning shot, he said. They're testing us. Isabel's pulse pounded, but her hands were steady. She pulled on her boots, grabbed the journal, and tucked it into her coat. They're not going to walk away, she said. No, Tomas agreed. But they're not walking in either. Not without paying. They stood at the windows watching the ridge. The sun hadn't fully risen, but they could see outlines 3 men at the tree line, horses behind them. Malcolm Vane stepped forward. He didn't raise a gun. He raised a paper. A deed. A different one. Forged, no doubt. Let's talk, he called. Hawk's voice was cold. You've had your chance, Vane. Isabel opened the cabin door and stepped out. Get off my land, she shouted. Next time you fire a shot, we won't wait. Vane smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Oh, Miss Reyes, he called. You've made this so much more dramatic than it needed to be. She didn't flinch. You don't scare me anymore. His gaze shifted to Hawk, then to Tomas, then back to her. We'll be seeing each other real soon, he said. Don't plant anything you're not willing to bury. He turned, signaled his men, and rode off. The dust lingered behind them like smoke. Isabel didn't move until they were gone from view. Then she looked at Hawk. We're running out of time. He nodded. Then we make the next move. This isn't just about land anymore. This is a line drawn in blood. The wind changed the next morning. It came down from the mountains cooler, wilder. It smelled like stone and old rain, even though the sky stayed dry. Isabel stood at the edge of the ridge, boots firm in the earth, watching clouds mass in the north. They hadn't broken yet, but they would. A storm was coming, not just the kind that moved through skies. The cabin behind her was fortified as best as it could be. Tomasa dug a shallow trench across the eastern slope and laid barbed wire behind the fence. Hawk had taken stock of their ammunition against 2 rifles, a few boxes of rounds, and a shotgun that fired a little crooked. Naomi had left 2 days ago, back to her own world of herbs and bones. But not before giving Isabel a pouch of dried roots and a warning. Don T trusts silence. That's when the killing usually comes. She hadn't understood what Naomi meant until now. The land had gone still. To still. Inside, Hawk and Tomas sat at the table. Maps spread across the wood. Isabel joined them without a word. They'll try to circle around the north, Hawk said, tracing the ridgeline with a fingertip. The slope's wide open. They could ride in to a cross. They'll need cover, Tomas added. Won't attack in daylight unless they're sure they've got the numbers. Which means they're waiting for dark, Hawk said. Or thunder. Tomas grunted. They'll move with the rain. Muffle the sound. Hide their fire. Isabel studied the map. It meant nothing to her at first. Just lines and guesses. But she traced the edges of the ridge where she'd walked. Where she'd bled from a thorn. Where she'd knelt to bury a dead bird 2 mornings ago. It was more than land now. It was her blood in the soil. Her breath in the trees. How many do you think he's bringing? She asked. Hawk looked at her. 5, maybe 6. Against 3. Tomas raised a brow. You counting yourself now? She met his gaze. Damn right I am. He smiled. Just a little. Good. They spent the rest of the day preparing. Hawk set up a lookout point behind the largest boulder, with a clear view of the northern approach. Tomas laid tin cans on string between the fence posts, an old trick to hear movement before seeing it. Isabel mixed Naomi's herbs with oil and spread the scent around the cabin. It wouldn't fool dogs, but it might confuse a man in the dark. By the time the sun dropped, the air felt like it was holding its breath. The 3 of them sat around the fire. No one said much. Hawk cleaned his rifle. Tomas sharpened a blade slowly. Isabel reread a page from her uncle's journal, one that had nearly broken her the first time. Land makes you honest. It doesn't care who you were, only what you do now. She closed the book and looked at Hawk. Do you think they'll try to kill me? She asked. He didn't flinch. Vane doesn't like getting his hands dirty. But he'll let someone else do it. She nodded. I don't want to kill anyone, she whispered. You don't have to want it, Tomas said. You just have to outlive them. Thunder rumbled far off. Not close, but it was coming. Hawk stood. Get some sleep. I'll take first watch. Isabel didn't argue. Her body was exhausted, even if her mind buzzed like lightning in a wire. She lay in the corner of the cabin, wrapped in an old blanket that smelled of dust and pine. The wood creaked overhead. The wind whispered across the roof like a warning. She closed her eyes. She dreamed of fire and rain, of her mother's voice calling her name, of silver veins cracking open the land like bone. And when she woke, the storm had arrived. Rain pelted the roof in bursts, heavy and cold. Wind howled through the valley. And the tin cans strung across the north fence rang. Once, twice, then silence. Hawk moved fast, rifle in hand, eyes scanning the dark. Tomas pressed his ear to the ground near the cabin wall, then rose, grim. 3 on foot, maybe more behind. Isabel grabbed the shotgun and crouched near the window. Her breath came fast, but she forced it slow. Remembered Naomi's hands. Remembered the journal. Remembered standing in that land office with Vane's voice dripping lies. They wouldn't take it. Not now. A shadow moved across the field, then another. Hawk fired once. One of the shadows dropped. Then all hell broke loose. Gunfire cracked through the rain. Isabel's ears rang. Thomas shouted something she didn't hear. A man tried to run across the side fence. She aimed and pulled the trigger. The shotgun kicked like a mule. The man fell. Smoke filled the cabin. Splinters flew from the doorframe. Hawk rolled across the floor and fired again through the window. Someone screamed. Isabel dropped behind the table, heart pounding, chest tight. She could taste blood, but she wasn't hit. Tomas flung the door open and vanished into the rain, blade in hand. Hawk shouted after him but didn't follow. He stayed by the window, watching, waiting. Another's coming left? Hawk yelled. Isabel moved on instinct. She ran to the side window, aimed, and fired. The shot missed, but the man turned back. Then it was quiet. Only rain. Only wind. Hawk didn't move. Didn't lower his rifle. Tomas reappeared, soaked and silent. 2 ran, he said. 2 dead. Vane's not among them. Isabel's hands were trembling now. Not from fear. From rage. They sent men to kill me, she said. For land. No, Hawk said. They sent men because they thought you wouldn't fight. She walked to the door, opened it, and stepped out into the rain. Her boots sank into the mud. She looked toward the ridge. Toward the broken fence. Toward the dark. They'll come again. Yes, Hawk said. We'll be ready. Lightning split the sky. She turned back toward the cabin, soaked to the bone, eyes sharp. I'm done being hunted. Let them come. The morning after the ambush was too quiet. No birds. No wind. No movement. Just the thick scent of mud and gunpowder clinging to the air like a warning. Isabel stood on the porch of the cabin, shotgun cradled in her arms, eyes fixed on the tree line. Her sleeves were rolled up, hands streaked with dirt and dried blood. Not hers, but it didn't matter. She hadn't slept. Neither had Hawk or Tomas. They moved like ghosts around the ridge, now checking traps, watching shadows, reinforcing weak spots in the fence. Even the land seemed tense, waiting for the next crack of gunfire. But nothing came. Just the pressure. Isabel sat on the edge of the porch, watching a bruise-colored cloud curl over the northern hills. She knew Vane was planning something worse. A man like him didn't accept failure. He turned it into cruelty. You should eat, Tomas said, setting a tin plate beside her. She didn't look at it. I am not hungry. Doesn't matter. Eat anyway. She gave a dry smile, but picked at the food corn, bread and beans, cold now, but solid. How long do you think we've got? Tomas sat beside her, quiet for a moment. A few days, maybe less. Vanille'll want to make sure next time. Do we leave first? She asked. Take it to the law. Make noise in town? Tomas shook his head. He's counting on that. He wants you scared. Wants you to think running is safer than fighting. She looked down at her plate. I don't want to die here, Tomas. You won't, he said softly. But you might have to become someone who could. That stayed with her. By mid-afternoon, Hawk returned from his ride with a torn scrap of paper and a cut on his cheek. Isabel ran to him the moment she saw blood. I'm fine, he said, brushing her off. Wasn't mine. She didn't ask. He handed her the paper. It was ripped from a ledger, scribbled in thick black ink. No signature, but the handwriting was familiar. Elegant. Cunning. You still have time to walk away. Take the loss. Live. She stared at the note until the words blurred. Hawk watched her. He's trying to give you a way out. One he thinks she'll take. She handed the paper back. What if I answered, meaning what? I want to meet him. On my terms? Alone. No, Hawk said immediately. That is not a strategy. That's suicide. She shook her head. It's leverage. He thinks I'm weak, that I won't face him unless I'm behind a gun. You want to go unarmed? I want to show him I'm not afraid of him anymore. Hawk's mouth was a hard line. He's not playing a game, Isabel. You're not in a courtroom or a classroom. He kills what embarrasses him. I'm done hiding, she said. Tomas stepped forward. Then we watched from a distance. You meet him, but not alone. Isabel looked between them. Fine, but I speak. Not you. No guns unless he draws first. Hawk's jaw worked, but he nodded. They sent a message back scratched in the dirt of an old cattle post 2 miles north, where Vane's men had camped before. A simple phrase. Tomorrow. Ridgeline. Noon. And Vane came. The next day, the sun burned hard, high above. The ridge shimmered with heat, and Isabel stood at its peak alone, dress whipping in the wind, her braid tight behind her. Vane arrived on a chestnut gelding wearing a gray coat, a pistol visible on his hip but untouched. 2 of his men flanked him, but kept their distance. Hawk and Tomas were hidden in the trees, rifles aimed but silent. Vane dismounted and approached like a man out for a Sunday stroll. Miss Reyes, he said, tipping his hat. Always a pleasure. Isabel said nothing. You're braver than I gave you credit for, he continued. I respect that. You don't know what respect means. He smirked. Oh, but I do. I'm here, aren't I? Talking, not shooting. She stepped forward. This land is mine, Malcolm. The law says so, and you know it. He shrugged. The law is flexible. Men are not. You sent people to kill me? No, he said smoothly. I sent men to scare you. I can't be held accountable if they were. Overzealous. Isabel's hands balled into fists. You're not getting the ridge. You're not getting 1 inch of it. Vane stepped closer, his voice low. You think you're strong now because you've tasted defiance. But you're alone, Isabel. That land will chew you up. It's already started. I'm not alone. She raised her voice slightly, not a scream, but something strong enough to carry. I've got names behind me, not just Tomas and Hawk. I've got Reyes in the soil, my uncle's voice in every damn apple tree. I've got people coming who remember what this place was before your kind rode through with greed in your saddlebags. Vane stared at her. You think that's enough? I think it's more than you've ever had. He smiled, then small, joyless. You've made this personal. That was your mistake. No, she said. My mistake was trusting you. But I've corrected that now. For a moment, they just stared at each other, 2 predators circling a kill that hadn't happened yet. Then she said, leave this land. Today, or next time the blood won't dry. She turned her back on him and walked away. Vane didn't stop her. Didn't he draw? But his voice followed her like a knife. This isn't over, Isabel Reyes. And when it ends, it won't be in your favor. Back at the cabin, Hawk looked ready to put a hole in the sky. That was too close, he said. She poured water into a basin, washing the dust from her hands. It was necessary. He's going to escalate. I know. Tomas looked between them, then out the window. Hope you're ready, he said. Because men like Vane, they don't break. Not until something breaks them first. Isabel stared out at the ridge. The land didn't look peaceful anymore. It looked awake, and it was watching. If I die here, I'll die on my feet with my name in the dirt and my hands full of fire. The fire came at night. Not from the sky, not from lightning, not from chance. It was set, deliberate, planned. Isabel woke to the smell of smoke clawing at the cabin walls. She didn't even hear the tin can alarms. The flames were already licking up the fence posts, crackling through dry brush, feeding fast on weeks of drought. Her chest seized. For one moment, her mind went blank. Then Hawk was shaking her. Get up! Now. She bolted upright, grabbed her boots, the shotgun, the journal always, the journal, and stumbled toward the door. Tomas was already outside, stamping out a patch of grass with a soaked blanket, eyes wild with fury. They lit it from 3 sides, he growled, trying to burn us out. The air was thick, orange, and searing. Isabel could barely see the trees at the edge of the ridge through the smoke. The flames hadn't reached the cabin yet, but they would. "Fast! We can't stop it," Hawk said, spitting smoke. "We make a break for the rocks. South Ridge, now." They fled with only what they could carry. Fire roared behind them like something alive. When they reached the rocky outcrop, Isabel collapsed, coughing, her face streaked with ash and sweat. She turned just in time to see the cabin catch. First the porch, then the windows, the roof. It lit up like it had been waiting to die. She didn't cry. Not yet. She couldn't. Not while it was still burning. They stayed hidden for hours, watching the land burn. Tomas didn't speak. He carved lines in the dirt with a stick, over and over. Hawk scanned the tree line with glassy eyes, jaw clenched tight. Isabel sat between them, holding the journal in her lap like it might dissolve. When the sun finally rose and the smoke settled into dull haze, they crept back toward what was left. Charcoal and ruin. The barn was gone. The apple trees scorched black. The fence reduced to melted wire and splinters. The cabin itself, a hollow skeleton. Ash covered everything. Isabel stepped inside the frame of the doorway. The floor collapsed inward. Her boots crunched on what used to be her uncle's chair, her bed, her last scrap of home. The tears came then. Not loud. Just steady. Tomas stood outside, silent. Hawk entered behind her. He picked through the rubble, looking for anything not lost. He found one of the tin plates, blackened but whole. He handed it to her without speaking. "Why would he do this now?" she asked. "Because you humiliated him," Hawk said. "You looked him in the eye and walked away. He's not used to that. So he burns the place to the ground. Because he can. Because he thought it would end you." She nodded slowly, fingers tightening around the plate. "Well," she said, her voice low, rough, "then he didn't burn it hard enough." They buried what they could salvage in a shallow pit near the edge of the ridge-bent tools. The rifle Tomas found beneath a charred floorboard, a small tin of matches sealed in wax. They weren't just hiding them. They were preserving what mattered. Naomi came that evening. She rode in silent, dismounted without speaking. Her eyes scanned the ruin, and for the first time since Isabel met her, Naomi looked shaken. She walked through the wreckage with reverence, plucked up a piece of scorched cedar and smelled it. Then she turned to Isabel. "You know what this means?" Isabel nodded. "He crossed the line." "No," Naomi said. "He erased it." That night, they camped in the clearing beside the burned cabin. Hawk stood watch. Tomas sharpened the blade he always kept in his boot. Naomi crushed herbs into a cloth pouch and tied it to Isabel's belt. "Protection?" Isabel asked. "No, memory." Naomi looked out over the smoking land. "You won't rebuild this," she said. "You don't need to. You build something new." Isabel looked into the fire. "What if I lose more?" Naomi didn't answer. She just touched Isabel's wrist. Soft, warm, present. By the next morning, Isabel had made her decision. They would not run. They would not scatter. They would go to Silver Spur. Not to plead. Not to hide. To expose Vane. If he wanted fire, she would give him light. She would drag his lies into the sun. You can't threaten what's already ash. Now he gets to see what rises from it. Silver Spur didn't feel like the same town when they rode in. The dust still hung in the air. The sun still scorched the roofs. But something had shifted. As if the ridge had sent its smoke ahead of them, and the town could smell the coming storm. Isabel sat straight in the saddle, hair braided tight, wearing the same suit-marked coat she'd escaped the fire in. She didn't wash it. Let them see the ash. Let them ask. Tomas rode to her left, silent as stone, rifle across his back. Hawk was on her right hand, never far from the revolver holstered at his side. They didn't ride fast. They didn't sneak in. They came like a verdict. Naomi had stayed behind, tending to the land that still smoldered. "You fight," she'd said before they left. "But make it hurt. Truth cuts deeper than bullets." The first person to spot them was the general store clerk. He stepped back from the porch like he'd seen ghosts. Whispers followed them down the street like wind chasing a brush fire. By the time they reached the sheriff's office, a small crowd had gathered. No one shouted. No one stepped in their way. The people of Silver Spur were many things: tired, bitter, used to bending, but they weren't blind. They saw the burns. They saw Isabel's eyes. Sheriff Doyle met them on the steps. A large man with thinning hair and a tired badge. He looked from Hawk to Tomas to Isabel, and his face hardened. "You bringing trouble here?" "No, Sheriff," Isabel said. "I'm bringing the truth." He crossed his arms. "You have 5 minutes." Inside, Isabel laid the deed on his desk. The birth certificate, the notarized letter from the land office, the photograph of her mother and uncle. Then she laid down the forged deed Malcolm Vane had tried to pass. "He forged this," she said. "He sent men to kill us. Burned my family's land to the ground. I want you to read it all. And I want you to tell me if the law still works here." Doyle sat slowly. "Read, twice." His mouth was a thin, pale line. "Where is he now?" "Somewhere in this town." "He's not hiding. He thinks the fire finished it." Doyle leaned back, sighing. "I should arrest him. I should have arrested him last year when he bought out half the North ranches with ghost money. But every time we try, he waves papers and threatens lawyers." "Then, make this the last time," Hawk said. Doyle looked at Isabel. "You sure about this? Once it starts, it won't stop quiet." She didn't hesitate. "I lost everything but my name." "I'm not losing that too." He nodded. "We do this right. Public loud. Town hall 20 minutes. You speak, I'll back the evidence. If the town sees what he's done, maybe they'll stop letting him rot the ground they live on." 20 minutes later, the church bell rang. The townsfolk gathered in the hall, murmuring like cattle before a storm. Isabel stood at the front, with Hawk beside her, Tomas by the door. Sheriff Doyle cleared his throat and raised a hand. "Folks, we got something to hear today. Real careful." He stepped aside. Isabel took the floor. She told them everything. About the forged deed. About the fire. About the bodies left on the ridge. She held up her mother's ring, blackened but whole, and told them why the land mattered. Then she read from the journal. Her uncle's words. Quiet words. "This land doesn't belong to me. I belong to it. And someday, someone with my blood will remember that." When she finished, the room was dead silent, until Malcolm Vane pushed open the doors. He walked in like a man who owned the place. Crisp shirt, polished boots. For men flanking him. He smiled at the crowd, then at Isabel. "That was quite the tale," he said. "Almost had me moved to tears." Sheriff Doyle stepped between them. "You have anything to say about this forged deed?" "About the arson." Vane smirked. "Forgery is a strong word. Maybe someone filed it wrong. Maybe the girl misunderstood. As for the fire, you threatened her," Hawk said. Vane turned toward him. "I warned her. She made herself a target." Gasps rippled through the room. But Isabel stepped forward. "You made one mistake, Malcolm. You did it all to someone who had nothing left to lose." He reached for his coat. Hawk was faster. Gun drawn, barrel steady. "No," Isabel said. "Let him show them who he really is." Vane froze, fingers just grazing the pistol, then slowly stepped back. Sheriff Doyle raised his voice. "This man is under arrest for conspiracy, arson, fraud, and attempted murder. Anyone interferes answers to me." The crowd didn't cheer, but they didn't stop it either. 2 deputies came forward. Vane went quietly, the smirk gone. Outside, thunder rolled. That evening, Isabel sat on the steps of the town hall, watching rain wash dust from the road. Tomas leaned against the post beside her. Hawk stood guard, still tense. "That won't be the end of him," Tomas said. "No," she agreed. "But it's the start of the end." She held the ring in her hand, turned it once, then slid it onto her finger. Truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs to stand its ground. The rain didn't let up for 3 days. It washed away the blood, the smoke, the last of the ash. The land soaked it in like a long exhale. For the first time since the fire, the air smelled clean. Not of survival, but of something else, something beginning. Isabel stood at the edge of the ridge, boots buried in mud, the ring on her finger glinting under the gray sky. The ruins of the cabin lay quiet behind her, now just a memory carved into the land. She didn't feel victorious. She felt raw, tired, like the fight had taken pieces she hadn't even known she could give. But the land was still here. That was enough. They returned to the ridge that week. Hawk helped her carry salvaged boards from town. Tomas rode out to neighboring farms, bartering for nails, fencing wire, seeds. Naomi came with a pack full of roots and tools, her presence quiet but steady. None of them called it rebuilding. They called it reclaiming. Day by day they cleared the rubble, cut charred wood into usable lengths, built a small lean-to against the largest standing beam. Not much, but shelter enough for now. Isabel worked with her sleeves rolled and her jaw set. She learned to hammer straight, learned to carry weight on her shoulders and not let it break her. She didn't speak much, but her silence wasn't empty. It was focus. On the 5th night, they ate by the fire. Naomi stirred a pot of beans. Tomas passed around tin cups of strong coffee. Hawk sat beside Isabel, arms draped over his knees, watching the stars appear one by one. "You ever think it would end like this?" he asked quietly. She shook her head. "I didn't think it would end at all." He looked at her then. Not just her face, but her posture, her scars, the way her hand rested on the ground like she was part of it. "It hasn't," he said. "It's just the middle." She met his eyes. "Do you think they'll come again?" Vane's men. Friends of his. Hawk shrugged. "Maybe. But not while the town's still watching. Not after what you said." Tomas tossed another log onto the fire. He wasn't the last snake in that valley. But you cut the head off the biggest one. That matters. Naomi passed Isabel a bowl. You gave them more than a fight. You gave them a choice. Isabel took the bowl and held it in her hands. "And what do I do now?" Naomi smiled. "Now you plant. You mend. You teach someone else how to stand up the way you did." The next morning, she walked the land alone. The apple trees were scorched, but not dead. Tiny buds clung to the blackened branches. Life under the ruin. She touched one branch gently. "I'm still here," she whispered. Her uncle's journal was tucked in her coat. She read it aloud as she walked page by page. His words didn't feel like echoes anymore. They felt like roots. She found a patch of soil that hadn't burned. Soft, dark, ready. And there, with her hands, she planted the first seed. She didn't know what would grow, but she believed something would. A week later, the first visitor arrived. A young woman named Clara Mendoza, daughter of a rancher who once owed his land to Vane. She brought lumber, a sack of flour, and a letter from her father. No words, just a map, marked with places that needed mending. Fences, wells, people. Clara looked around at the ridge and said, "My mama says this land's always had a woman's voice in it." I think she meant you. Isabel didn't know what to say, but when Clara offered to help, she didn't say no. And just like that, the rebuilding wasn't just hers. By mid-spring, 3 more families came. Hawk built a larger shelter. Tomas started teaching the neighbor boys how to carve fence posts. Naomi tended a medicine garden by the creek. And Isabel stood in the doorway of what would be her new home frame-up, roof half-laid, but solid. The ridge looked different. Not healed, but healing. She watched the wind ripple through the grass and saw a future in it. Not because it was perfect, but because it was hers. She turned to Hawk. "You still think this is the middle?" He smiled. "Now, I think it might be the start." She nodded slowly, her voice firm. "I used to be afraid of silence, but now I know that's where the land speaks back. This place doesn't just carry my name anymore. It carries my answer." Summer came fast to the ridge. The sun was a little meaner. The wind, a little drier. But the soil still held firm, and the seeds Isabel planted had started to push green fingers through the dirt. Tomato vines clung to their posts. The apple trees, though scarred, sprouted stubborn leaves. Nothing about this land grew easy, but it grew honest. The rebuilt shelter had walls now, a roof patched with salvaged shingles, and a front door that Tomas insisted on carving by hand. On the lintel he etched a single word, Reyes, not to claim it. Just to remind them. Clara and her father rode up most mornings, bringing supplies and stories. Hawk spent his afternoons repairing the trails with a boy named Elias, who'd lost his brother in one of Vane's land grabs. Naomi taught the children to read the clouds, to mix healing salves, to listen to what the land needed rather than take what they wanted. And Isabel worked, from dawn to dusk, not to survive, but to shape. The ridge wasn't a place to hide anymore. It was becoming a place to live. That's when the letter arrived. A simple envelope. No return name. Just dust, old ink, and the weight of something unfinished. Isabel opened it by lamplight. Inside was a single note, unsigned. His trial's been moved. County seat. Politics being what they are, he may not stand for anything. They're trying to bury it quiet. Thought you should know. There was no name, no date, but she knew what it meant. Vane wasn't done, and neither was she. She left before dawn. Tomas and Hawk protested. Of course they did. They argued. She let them. Then she packed her coat, her journal, her mother's ring, and climbed onto the old bay horse that had carried her through smoke and ash. Naomi handed her a leather pouch. For what you might need, she said. What's in it? Naomi smiled softly. Only what can't be taken. Isabel didn't ask more. She just rode. The county seat was 3 days south by hard trail. She rode through the cracked basin, past the ghost fences of abandoned farms, into towns where Vane's shadow had once stretched long. Every time she mentioned his name, someone looked away. Someone changed the subject. But she also saw something else now, recognition. People remembered her. The girl who stood up, the woman who didn't run. On the morning of the 4th day, she reached the courthouse. It was tall and tired, with sandstone steps worn smooth. She tied her horse and walked through the main doors like she had every right to be there. Inside, a clerk told her the hearing had been rescheduled again. Quietly. No public notice. No town gathering. Just a sealed room and a few well-paid men in suits. She didn't tea leave. Instead, she sat on the front steps. All day. Then the next. On the 3rd day, a reporter from the Denver Herald came by. A young man with a crooked hat and a sharp pen. He asked why she was there. She told him. Everything. By nightfall, her name was in print. Not as a victim, but as a witness. A woman who wouldn't let the fire go cold. The next week, others came. Families from Silver Spur. Workers from the northern ranches. A preacher who remembered baptizing Isabel's mother in a river, now choked with dust. They sat beside her on the courthouse steps, one by one, like fence posts in a line, until the judge had no choice. The trial went public, and Vane had to answer. He walked into that courtroom with a smirk and a fresh suit. But this time, he didn't find a sleepy town or a bought sheriff. He found Isabel, front row, straight back, eyes like sharpened glass. When they asked her to speak, she stood. She didn't shout, didn't cry. She simply told the truth about the forged deed, the fire, the blood on her land, the silence she had broken. And when she was done, she said, "This man thought fire would make me disappear, but all he did was burn off what I no longer needed. What's left is unbreakable." Vane was convicted. Not of everything, not the worst of it, but enough. Enough to stop him. Enough to warn the next man who thought silence was safety. When she returned to the ridge, there were new fences up. A barn half-framed. Children laughing by the creek. Clara ran to meet her with a letter in hand. It was from the Denver Herald. They wanted to publish her uncle's journal. Wanted to tell the story, right? Isabel read the offer twice. then folded it and put it in her pocket. She looked out over the land. Not all of it was hers, but what mattered was she walked to the garden and dropped to one knee, pressing her hand into the soil. Then softly, "We did it," the wind answered, not with words, but with warmth. He tried to take everything, but he never understood some things don't burn. Autumn came gently to the ridge. The nights cooled first, then the mornings, and then the colors shifted. Gold crept into the grasses. Rust bloomed on the edge of the apple leaves. The sky held its blue longer, stretching the daylight with a kind of quiet patience. For the first time in a long time, Isabel had the space to breathe. No fire. No courtroom. No threat waiting in the brush. Just life. It didn't come in loud declarations or banners waving. It came in fence rails hammered in straight lines, in children's boots thudding across dirt, in the sound of laughter shared without fear of it being silenced. The ridge had a pulse again. She spent her mornings in the garden, pulling weeds and harvesting what had held on through the dry summer. Tomatoes still small but fierce. Beans tough-skinned but sweet. A few corn stalks that had no business growing but did anyway. Each one a kind of victory. Hawk rebuilt the barn slowly, measuring twice, cutting once. He spoke little, but when he did, it meant something. Tomas taught the children how to read the rings of a tree. Naomi oversaw the birth of 2 goats and laughed so hard she scared them both. They were building a world, not just surviving one. Isabel had never felt so aware of her hands. How they knew the work now? How they knew what good soil felt like, what tired earth needed, how to guide a nail without splitting wood. Her body remembered things now her mind didn't need to think about, and the ache she carried deep in her chest since the night her home turned to ash had quieted. Not gone, but gentler. Some wounds didn't close, but they could be carried with grace. One afternoon, Clara came to the garden, a letter in hand. "Another one from Denver," she said. "They want to know if you'll write the foreword yourself." For the journal? Isabel wiped her hands on her apron and took the envelope. She read it twice, then nodded. "I'll write it, but I won't write it for them." Clara tilted her head. "Then who for?" Isabel looked out at the ridge. "For the ones not yet born, who'll need to know what it cost." She wrote that night by lantern, the journal beside her, open to the first page. Her uncle's handwriting steady and curved, her own beneath it bolder, scarred. She wrote about truth, about what can be buried and what refuses to stay silent, about fire and what survives it, about names not as possession, but as promise. When she finished, she didn't reread it. She folded the pages, sealed the envelope, and placed it in the box with the rest of the manuscript. Let the world make of it what it would. In the weeks that followed, people from neighboring counties started to visit, not for help, for knowledge. They came to ask about rain storage, wind fences, natural remedies Naomi brewed from river mint and pine sap. They came to learn. Isabel didn't think of herself as a teacher, but she remembered what Naomi said. Teach someone else how to stand up the way you did. So she did. Not with speeches, but with open hands and time. A family from Marlow came and helped dig a new well. A widow from Dry Butte traded books for seeds. A young man who couldn't speak still carved posts with Tomas for 2 full days and left with enough food to last a week. And slowly, without any single moment marking the change, Isabel became something more than just a name on a deed. She became the spine of the place. One morning, Hawk caught her looking out over the land, a faint smile on her lips. "What are you thinking?" he asked. She turned. "That I might finally be ready." "For what?" "To not be angry all the time." He looked surprised, then nodded. "That's harder than fighting, you know." "I know." They stood in silence for a moment. Then Hawk added, "You could have left. After the trial. After the name was cleared, no one would have blamed you." She watched the wind move through the wheat. "I didn't stay to prove anything," she said. "I stayed because this land doesn't just carry my name. It carries my answer." That evening they lit a fire. Not out of necessity, but celebration. Clara brought fresh bread. Naomi roasted squash with herbs. Tomas told a story about his father and a mule so stubborn it broke its own cart just to avoid hauling it. The children laughed until they cried. And Isabel? She listened. Not to defend, not to prepare, just to be part of it. Later, when the fire died low, she stepped away and stood beneath the stars. They looked the same as they had when she arrived, when the land was just a fight waiting to happen, when hope felt like something borrowed, but now she didn't need to borrow anything. She had built something that couldn't be taken, not by fire, not by fear, only given, only grown. Some scars don't fade, but they don't stop you from planting seeds with both hands. Winter came without warning. One day the wind shifted, and the next frost kissed the tops of the hills. The ridge grew quiet again, but not the kind of quiet that follows destruction. It was the kind that blankets a place when it knows it's ready to rest. The harvest had been modest. Some crops made it, some didn't. But no one went hungry. The barn stood firm, filled with tools and stories. Children helped stack firewood. Neighbors brought wool, salt, things that couldn't be grown but could be shared. Isabel watched the first snowfall from the front porch of her new home. It wasn't finished, yet still a few gaps in the shingles, a door that creaked when the wind blew, but it held. Just like her. Inside, the fire crackled. A pot of stew simmered. Naomi dozed in a chair, a book in her lap. Hawk whittled a spoon from cedar. Tomas smoked a pipe by the window, carving names into the back of a wooden stool. Clara had braided strings of dried herbs and hung them over the door. She said it was to keep the house honest. Isabel liked that. She sat with a blanket around her shoulders and her uncle's journal in her lap. Her fingers traced the ridges of the cover, worn smooth by time and touch. So much had been lost, but so much had taken root. The next day, she walked the ridge alone. Snow crunched under her boots. The wind carried no threat, just the hush of a world taking a breath. She stopped by the apple trees, now bare and skeletal. But at the base of one, a sapling had broken through the soil. Thin, fragile, but alive. She crouched beside it. "You weren't supposed to survive," she whispered. "But I'm glad you did." She reached into her coat, pulled out Naomi's leather pouch, and poured a circle of dried ash and herbs around the base. Memory. That's what Naomi had said it was for. She stood, looked out across the land. The scars were still there, burn marks in the wood, charred lines along the fence, but they didn't sting the way they used to. They had become part of the place. Honest, unhidden, and that, too, felt right. As the weeks passed, the snow deepened. People from further out brought news. Roads frozen, cattle moved, another bad winter likely. But there was no panic on the ridge. Preparations had been made. They had learned, adapted. Each evening brought firelight, shared meals. And music played on an old fiddle Naomi had unearthed from someone's attic. They told stories not just of the past, but of what could be. The children began carving shapes into the walls of the barn. Symbols. Names. Marks of belonging. One day, Clara asked Isabel what they should call the place. It needed a name now, she said. People were referring to it more and more. Isabel thought for a moment, then said, simply, Ashroot, because it reminded them where they started. And what had grown after? On the first night of the new year, they lit a fire at the center of the ridge. Not for warmth, not for fear, but as a sign. A circle formed around it, neighbors, travelers, families, the quiet and the weary. No one led it. No one spoke first. The flames danced and the sky shimmered with stars. Then a little girl stepped forward. Elias' youngest. She handed Isabel a small drawing, folded in half. Inside was a sketch of the ridge, the barn, the trees, the mountains behind it. And in the center, a woman standing with arms wide open. "You look like that when you talk," the girl said. "Like you're letting the wind pass through you." Isabel knelt, took the paper and smiled. "That's because I don't need to fight it anymore." Later that night, as the fire burned low, Tomas asked her, You think this'll last? Isabel stared into the coals. Nothing does forever, she said. But that's not the point. We don't build so things last forever. We build because it matters while it's here. He nodded. Then, after a moment, you ever wish it all happened different? She thought about the fire, the fear, the loss, then about the children laughing in the barn. Naomi's tea, Hawk's silence that always came with meaning, the stubborn apple trees. No, she said softly. I just wish I'd known sooner that hope doesn't come back as a blaze. It comes back as a root, quiet, steady, deep. Spring would come again. The frost would melt, the earth would soften, and the ridge would bloom in its own wild rhythm. And Isabel would be here, not as someone guarding ruins, but as someone planting futures. Because in the end, the story wasn't just about what had been taken. It was about what had endured. And more than that, what had been made.